Hi everyone, welcome to this new installment of the behind the scenes series. Today we're going to have a look at this image which has been posted in our Instagram account, a while ago. As you can see, there's not much architecture going on, but it's more about the landscape and the framing and really small details that sort of focus the image on interesting parts. So we're going to have a look at it. First, we're going to have to look at the 3D model and then a little bit of post-processing as usual. And hopefully we'll manage to cover everything that is interesting to know about that image. So we can start with you. So as you can sort of think and notice now, the scene is extremely straightforward. It's only a couple of meters wide. There's only the car park here that has been modeled a little bit more larger than the actual scene, because the thing is, I already know or knew before I started exactly what kind of shot I wanted to take, so I didn't really had to do anything further out than what the image would be about, which is a good thing, so that you can basically spend 30-minute modeling and then it's just rendering and post-processing and you have like an image done in maybe an hour and a half or something like that. Anyway, so that was the final framing. What you can say, basically there's not much to say about the model in itself. There was this, it's a lot about, basically I modeled the spline here and did everything from it. So it was either a surface mapping modifier to get the concrete here, or a sweep modifier with a specific section that has been swept along the spline here to get the gutter, or something a little bit modified a little bit more to get this sort of a marble thingy. And then that guy here is just the terrain around it that is also done from the same spline. So it's, in terms of modeling, it's really straightforward. This guy has been a little bit, so there's like a quadify, you know, that guy here, quadify mesh, so that you get the quads basically, and then there's been used the paint deformation with a push-pull to get this sort of small thing here, and then I've added a noise modifier to get smaller. Here you can see the difference, so that basically when you start scattering stuff on this plane, it's gonna get more interesting and not too flat. So that was pretty much it. I've added this sort of brick wall behind the camera so that there's no, because here you can see in the image the reflection, and you can already know that if there was nothing behind me, there would have been like the horizon line, which would be extremely ugly. So you always have to think about what's going on. Like if you're dealing with like a lot of reflection, you have to think about what's going on behind your camera. Beside that, it's just a little bit of forest back here. The modeling was a little bit detailed, but it's still quite simple. There's like this sort of spider things that are scattered in between each glass plate. Each glass plate has been chamfered so that you have a better, like a little bit of detail that it's still worth to have, because it changes a little bit the perception of the objects. Here, in terms of materials, it's pretty straightforward as well. I think if you look at these guy here, you can see it's actually like, it's been done a while ago, and I've noticed I wouldn't do that material this way, because a blend material for such a simple material is a little bit too much. But basically you have a opacity map that sort of do the dotted thing, and with a variation of refraction, or refraction or opacity, and that's pretty much it. The glass that is kind of interesting is that there's a large noise map on each plate so that you get a tiny bit of bump and tiny bit of deformation, because it always add a bit of realism not to have like a perfectly flat reflection. So that's it. And in terms of maybe the metal, but I think they're really simple. Yeah, well, you can see here in the bump map and in the reflection map, reflection glossiness, there are like dirt maps so that you can slight variation, but that's really simple. Same goes with the concrete here, which is not really complicated, I think. And I'm saying concrete, but I think it's more of a like sand. Yeah. So as you can see, same thing here, a little bit of reflection in dirt maps, bumps, really simple material. I could have taken the time to work a little bit with displacement so that you can have a little more interesting detail, but still it's really simple. Then we can go on to the forest pack objects. So there could be a way to actually merge most of them into one single object, but I really like to keep them separate because I don't think it add much render time or RAM need. So I think it's, at least in terms of clarity, it's a little bit more efficient. So here have the mulch, which is like one of the basic presets already in this usable in the forest pack library. So it's one of them, I don't remember which one. So that you get this sort of a small under part of the of the landscape. Then you have the low objects or shrubs, which is here in terms of geometry. So you can see like they're I think they're used in clusters. Oh, not even. So yeah, it's really chaotic in here. Not much to say. There's like slight variation, but it's really like the basic presets for forest pack objects. Then you have the leaves here, which is set on like the surface here, and I'm using a paint, like a brush tool to paint the areas I want to use, because otherwise if I don't use it, they're going to be everywhere, which could have been interesting as well, but still I wanted to have them more around the edges. Be a little bit careful, because like if you have that kind of leaves, you want them to sort of fit the kind of leaves that is around your landscape. One thing that I oftentimes see and that I find quite funny, but anyway, is that if you have pine trees, you're not going to have leaves on the ground. You're going to have like the little needles, because well, they don't have leaves. So be careful that there's sort of a like not a mismatch between the trees you're putting around and the leaves you're putting on the ground, because if there's no such leaves on trees around your area, it doesn't make sense for these leaves to be around here. And then bush high, so these guys are a little bit higher, so it's these guys here, so that they sort of cut the line that was here at the bottom of the car park, and also create some reflection in the background. So really simple. And the last guys is the back shadow reflection. So basically it's a line of trees that I've put in front of my brick wall, so that I get these nice guys, because the other guys here are really like so scattered that I would have mainly white areas, which is definitely not what I wanted. So you can see, really simple setup. Since it's quite hard to get a perfect preview of what it's going to look like with the forest pack objects, I tend to keep some of the trees or hero trees as a normal mesh. So here you can see, if I use that guy, these guys are are not in forest pack, basically, especially for this like foreground tree or hero tree, because I wanted to know exactly how it would be set. So here you can see you have like a little bit of foliage on top here in the lower and the upper part, and some branches on the right. Another thing worth mentioning is, whoops, that guy, is the DOF. There's a DOF that's been calculated at render time. It's, as you can see, it's really small. So if I go into my camera settings, you can see we've got a f.3, 3.0, simple setup, and so the depth of field is enabled, and the target is at 7 meters, so it's around that bench. So basically I've got like quite a bit of bokeh and out of focus area in the foreground, and that area in the background here is a little in focus, but you can see it's a little bit out of focus, and here that's good. So that's pretty much it in terms of modeling. In terms of lighting, there isn't much going on. I think it's I have a HDRI set somewhere, not here. Yeah, HDRI, so that I could get this sort of overcast look. It's a little bit overexposed, so that because I like it that way. There's no really noticeable cast shadows, which is sort of what I was looking for, because, well, that's really a pure, like, regarding the taste, because I was a little bit tired of the usual really warm feeling inside the foliage or a park or whatever, and I wanted it to feel a little bit colder and to sort of fit the rigid grid that was here and have more of a stormy look. Anyway, it would have looked quite good as well with like normal sky with cast shadows. And, you know, like, especially cast shadows are interesting when you have foliage, because you have like sort of more organic looking shadows on the ground, which could be interesting. I'm pretty sure that's pretty much it for the modeling part. So we're gonna skip to, so the rendering looked like that. I always have kind of crappy looking raw rendering, but it's because I always like to have a bit of play around with the post-production part. So if my rendering were too nice, I would be bored, and anyway, I wouldn't be able to get the look I want straight out of the frame buffer. Anyway, so here you have, I always have, even though I tend to try to switch to 32-bit work, I basically save a different JPEG that is overexposed, and I sort of mix them to have like my normal exposition, the overexposed one, and I sort of mix them in a way that sort of suits what I want. Here's a tiny switch I did in terms of color balance or something like that in the frame buffer directly. So because I was playing around with it, I was like, yeah, it sort of looks okay. So here's the thing, but you can see it's like a 20% opacity map, and it's not used much, but it does change the feeling of the image. Here, the base adjustment is just because there were some areas that were not treated properly here, where you have like the foliage going through your bench and etc. So that's not good. Here is a saturation adjustment. Here you can see desaturates, and that's pretty much it. So it was on the part of the vegetation that I found was a little bit too bright. This guy here is the same, but it's sort of switching. You can see if I switch to that guy, you can see the color is sort of shifting a little bit. So that's it. Then we're onto the usual burn and dodge part. So here the burnt part were especially to sort of enhance the lower part of these benches here, and that dodge part here was to sort of highlight some vegetation here. So really simple. And here there's a curve adjustment that is used to sort of improve the contrast or increase the contrast between the foreground here that is supposed to be quite dark and the background that is a little bit lighter. And here I think it was just some play around with some sort of really soft God rays. So here, but it's extremely faint because that thing wouldn't actually really happen with that kind of sky, but I just wanted to have it anyway. But it's so subtle, I don't think it distracts too much. So that's it. Then we have that guy that is, as you can see, I think this is I'm using the camera row, so Control-Shift-A in Photoshop so that you can sort of tweak a little bit the exposure again. Basically what I do is that once I'm sort of almost done, I merge everything. So I create a new layer. I do like what's the Control-Shift-A-E so that I get everything merged into one single layer, and then I use the camera row window to sort of change a little bit the mood and fine-tune it, because there's always slight variation that you have in mind at the end. So I usually bump up the exposure a little bit, as you can see here, and use a little bit the clarity thing. So yeah, stuff like that, really simple. Then it's the usual Nick collection thing, but here the thing is, for once I was quite happy with the final result. So these guys here are like extremely low opacity. That guy is not even, so you can see the difference is extremely small. And here it's a bokeh, still from the collection, because I wanted to add just a tiny bit, because I quite liked their effect they had here. So it's really like 50% opacity, and I kept it only in some part here. So really simple post-production. It's just a matter of having the proper saturation and hues, and so that you have a nice contrast and sort of focus your image properly. Of course, it's also about the composition itself, because here also I'm not really sure what was the image about, if it was more about this area here or the wall here, but I think what I was interested in most was the sort of foreground idea that sort of frame two different kind of planes, one that is horizontal with sitting areas and stuff like that, and another one that is sort of highly reflective and vertical with some sort of see-through effect that would be kind of suggestive. It could have been interesting, I think, to have something a little less clear, so that you sort of get the ideas that cars are behind the glass plates, but not so, like a little bit more subtle. But I usually don't have time to play around much with that kind of non-commissioned images, unfortunately. There are also small details that I quite like to add, like, this sort of small trenches or details of the way the plates are cut and stuff like that. Really simple details. And I think that'll be it. Hopefully you've learned some interesting stuff that you can implement in your next images and workflow, and I'll see you in the next behind the scenes installment. Bye guys.
Schneider.